Alright, what's up guys? Thanks for tuning in here to watch the progress of my 3D printed mask here, Avengers mask. This is the rescue helmet. So basically, I didn't take a video of the first part because it's really just the first steps. But what I did is I basically used a heavy filler primer. Whenever you print these 3D masks, they do have some blemishes in them, just for the way they print. You can kind of see how there's dips and curves and little grooves within the way the filament prints. So really what I do is I kind of do a couple heavy coats of filler primer, and then I just use a black sandable primer to go over this. And then what I do is sand this down, and what that does is it allows me to see high spots and low spots within there, so I know I can go in and fill it with a putty filler or do more sanding or whatnot. So this is just kind of the first step. You can see the original colors that I started with, and eventually I'll spray all this in when I do my final coat. But it's a 3-piece mask that was printed on a Ender Pro. It did an okay job. I mean, there's a lot of things that will need to get filled in. You'll see a lot more videos of the mask that I've done and finished. But essentially, I'll have a workable hinge on here and everything. The eyes will have a cover with LEDs, and hopefully it'll look a lot like the rescue helmet that we see Pepper Potts wear in Endgame. But essentially what I'm going to do now is go through and do the first level of sanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with I'm not sure if I'm going to do 400 or 600 first, but I'm going to do a two-step sanding. If I do 400, I'll follow up with 800. If I do 600, I'll still probably end with 800. But the idea is to make it very smooth, because we're going to do more layers of filler primer. But there will be a second part to the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this sanded down, kind of show you how it looks. We'll do the first heavy layer of filler primer, and then kind of go to there. I'm hoping to get this video knocked out in 3 parts. So we'll have a beginning, a mid, and then the end where where it's all painted and I'm putting all the LEDs in and everything. So stay tuned for some updates here after I get some sanding done. All right, so here you can see after sanding what we've done. And like I said, really the purpose for the way I do this is to kind of bring out the low spots and the spots that need to be leveled. So you can see after going over it, you can kind of see all those areas that need a little bit more work. So I'll go through and kind of smooth these out. I changed up the sanding process a little bit. The reason for that is 400 was taking a little bit long, so I actually went down to 180, believe it or not. So I just used these 3M1s here. I did 180 and then I did 240 and just kind of did a 2-stage. It's very smooth, and that's kind of what we want. You have to be really careful on certain areas. This is a very intricate mask because of all the fine lines and everything. You don't want to sand them too hard or use too much filler primer, because areas like this you'll lose that definition. And you can kind of see here where it's kind of rounded off, and I actually went over it with a razor blade. And what I'll do is I'll take some acetone, and that will clean all of the built up paint out of there. And it's just one of the challenges that you have with 3D printing. I mean, I'm not going for movie quality. Obviously some areas are deeper that I can sand, but you can still see how I'm gonna have to go through and clean all of these areas up, because either the filament kind of didn't print as sharp as it should, or the paint is starting to fill it in. You can see back here where my printer just kind of did a crappy job. So, you know, I'm just trying to do a fun little project here, but I'll go through and clean up all these edges. But yeah, essentially, I mean, this only took about 5 minutes or so. It wasn't too bad. It was a nice quick sanding job. And I'm going to clean up some of these edges here, and then we're going to put some filler primer on and show you, update and show you how that looks. here we are at our next process of the helmet. So basically what I did is, to recap, I had sanded everything to get the low spots to kind of show up. And what I did is did 2 coats of filler primer. And filler primer you really have to let dry, because it does have bits of body filler in it. It's supposed to fill in microscopic blemishes and things like that. So if you sand it too soon, it can actually clump up, and you can actually kind of strip it off. It'll get all like smudgy kind of. It'll clump up. That's the best definition I could kind of use. So I actually let this sit for a whole day, about 24 hours, and let it sit in the sun for a little bit too, just to dry. But what I've done is, when you use filler primer, the smaller details will kind of fill in. So what I did is, after I painted it, I went through with a razor blade and just kind of remade all these lines just so I don't lose them. And then this morning what I did was I just took a small screwdriver and kind of carved more out. The first 4 to 5 hours of the filler primer, it's still spongy. So if you were to try to, like I said, sand it or get too aggressive with this, it would actually tear off, and I'll actually show you. And this will fill out, so it'll be okay, but I kind of got a little bit too aggressive and it took a piece of it off. That's okay, because you can still see I still have some blemishes in here that I have to try to fill in and knock down. And again, I'm not going for movie quality, I just want this to look cool. But I've got little areas in here where I just need to get in there and kind of fine sand some things. I'm going to try my best to get this filled in. You can kind of see where the filler primer runs over, how it fills that in on that top part. But in here, I don't want to just load that up with paint, because it'll run down here and I'll lose that edge. So I'll take some putty and just fill that in and just sand it. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, is I'm going to kind of go through and address all the minor details. And now is when it's going to get that 600 and 800 grit sand, because you can see that a lot of the blemishes are gone, that the mask is smoother, but we need to make it even more crisp and more detailed. So I'm going to go through and kind of fine tune all the little blemishes, stuff like this. This all has to get filled in with putty, little minor details, things like this. I'm going to try to clean up as best as I can. I'll sand it with 600 and 800, and then realistically do the last coat of filler primer, and then it will be ready for a final sand, which will be probably 1500, and then we'll actually get into preparation for painting in the next day here. So I will post an update, but you can see that the helmet is starting to look pretty cool. Obviously still work to do, but it looks better than the raw print that I had started off with. So we'll do some sanding on this here and give you an update. All right, so here is what we've got going after a 2-stage sanding here, and I've kind of cleaned up some of the areas that there were printing blips, as I like to call them. But essentially what we've done is gone through and kind of sanded it, and you can see how there's less and less of these low spots, and that's what we want. That's got to get filled in a little bit more on this side, but you can see where there's less and less of these low spots, which is good, which means we're finally starting to get to a level playing field, essentially. So this is going to happen throughout your sanding process, but this is really the right way to do this if you're trying to get your 3D prints to look as best as possible, is just sanding them multiple times. A lot of times people will just take filler primer and just keep loading it on here without sanding, and it will fill in the blemishes and the defects, but you're not going to have that crispness and that proper refinement on your prints. So essentially this has been wiped down with some alcohol, and I've kind of gone back through and I am constantly just digging out these fine lines because we do not want these to, we don't want to lose the dexterity and the integral properties of the helmet. If these all fill in, it's going to lose a lot of the character that the mask actually brings. So this is pretty much ready for another layer. So what I'm going to do is get my filler primer ready. I'm going to do a very light coat, probably 2 very light coats, and then essentially kind of do this process over again. But I will get these painted and then show you the next steps. So I wanted to show you this part that I've done before I do the rest of it. So basically, I went through and did another, really the last layer of filler primer. You can kind of see how it's keeping its definition in certain areas pretty good. So basically what I did with the face shield here is I sanded it 3 times over. So I went with 600, 800, and 1000. After I did that, I was able to locate all of the high spots, or I should say low spots, and fill them in. So what I did is I just took some filler putty, and I'll show it at the end of the video. I don't know where it is right now. With the filler putty, you want to let it sit. So I did that last night, sometime around, I don't know, 6 o'clock maybe, and it's now about 10 o'clock, and I sanded it down. So I just filled in all the spots and then smoothed them out. So basically what I did is I got in all those areas, and you can still see where I've got some stuff I've got to knock down by hand still. I just have to get very small pieces of sandpaper in there. But I went through the whole mask, and any place that you see that's red other than that little spot there, those were low spots in the mask. So what that ends up doing is showing when you paint it. So we want this all to be as smooth as possible. So I kind of went through and did all that. I'm trying to keep my lines as best as I can. I have not wiped this down with alcohol, so once I do that, it'll be a lot cleaner. But yeah, essentially I just have a little bit more sanding to do in the eyes to try to clean that up, really just that spot right there. But basically this piece, once I get this smoothed out here, will be ready for sandable primer. It will not need any more filler primer. I resanded this after I knocked these down with 800, 1000, 1500, and 2000. So you can actually see it's almost got gloss to it. That's because I'm starting to smooth it out, and that's really what we want before our final coat of primer. What I'll do is I'll hit this with a sandable primer and then do a 2000 and a 3000 sand, and then it'll be ready for paint after I knock down these few spots. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to sand this again with 600, 800, and then 1000. I'm going to come in with my putty and fill in any spots like here and any place that needs it, and then I'll basically do the same process with this. The back piece really isn't too bad, and you can see I was sanding here. There's some minor dips in the back, but I haven't really sanded this. I'm going to try to fill that edge in as best as I can, but that's a very hard spot to sand. So, and realistically, it's the back of the mask, and the mask is going to be hanging on my wall, so I'm not to cheat, but I'm not worried about the back being perfect. I really want the front to be this piece right here to really look as best as possible. And then, like I said, I am going to have a hinge on this. I may even wire up a little actuator to lift it, something that runs off like a 1.5 volt battery or something like that. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely see the difference from, you know, sanding it, how much more smoother it is, and that's really where we want to get it at. Obviously this has not been painted yet, but it will be. So what I'm going to do is finish touching this up. I'm going to sand this, filler putty everything that I need on the jaw part and the back, and then I'll give you another update. And then, like I said, realistically, sandable primer, 2 coats of that, a final sand, an alcohol wipe, and it's ready to paint. So we're kind of starting to get into the end stage here. This is where you just start getting antsy and you see the integrity of the mask starting to come out, and you're like, man, I really want to paint this, but I am a little bit OCD and I'm just trying to get this as clean as possible. So we'll do more sanding and show the next process here, part in the process, I should say. All right, so here we are post glazing and the last coat of filler primer. I will more than likely just do another tiny bit on the lower parts, but for the most part these came out really good. They're all very smooth. They've kept their definition, so to speak, and I'm just trying to keep from touching them too much here, but these all look pretty good. I'll go through and clean up the lines a little bit more, and we will be ready to start laying some paint later today. So I like to let these dry for a good 8 hours or so. I may or may not get to putting a coat of paint on them today, but like I said, I kind of went through and filled everything in. There are some spots on top and just some low spots here and there, but overall it looks really good. I also did the back of them too, because these were actually exposed. You can see where I have to still prime those, so I filled all those in with the putty, so those still have to get primed. So like I said, there is still some painting I have to do on these primer wise, but I think it's coming out pretty good. Like I said, I'm a little bit OCD, but I'll go through and just kind of trim out, reestablish the lines on some of these. I've been able to keep them pretty good though. Like I said, I just kind of go through with a small pick tool, and after I paint, just kind of drag it through just to redefine those lines. On the mask, it kind of stinks because on here you actually have a line that goes from here all the way down. With the sanding and the way I did it, I was not able to keep that line. But again, a lot of times when you do these masks, you kind of make them as your own. You know, it's not movie quality, but I do a little bit more than, you know, some people just paint these and you can see all the lines from the printing. I try to make it as smooth as possible. In reality, when we paint these, we're going to do some wet sanding and some polishing, and really it's going to make this mask pop. So I think it's going to look great. Should come out really well with the backlit LED eyes and everything. It should definitely look cool. So I'm going to do a little bit more touching up, and then we will show you the first coat of paint hopefully within the next day or two here. Alright, so here we are in the post sanding and final filler primer spraying and finishing, and I've gone ahead and prepped the base of the helmet. And basically what I did, because Rescue's helmet, these areas here are silver, I went ahead and masked all of this off, so any place that's gray is going to be painted silver. So I masked off the entire helmet. If you are doing masking and you have to paint, I always recommend painting the light color first. If you do the dark one, it could affect the color on top, so that's why I did this. And the way I did this, if you're doing any sort of painting or 3D printing that has intricate curves, what I recommend doing is getting a very good masking tape. 3M is really one of the best. This is actually for curved surfaces for paint and body shops. So this will go in here real good. And what I actually did is I actually placed the tape over. I made one line and then did another line over it, and then I actually just took a razor blade and I cut along these lines to get it exact and precise. Trying to lay it by hand, you won't be able to get these curves perfect. So I laid one as close as I could, and then I laid another piece on top overlapping, and then I trimmed that with a razor blade. So again, I recommend that. It gets everything incredibly precise, very crisp, very clean. That way when you do paint, it is nice and uniform and symmetrical. So 3M tape right there. This is the glazing putty I was telling you about when you do your to fill in your low spots. And you know, this has a hardener in it, so basically once you unscrew it and apply it, it starts to dry. So I'll probably eventually do a video of actually going through all the steps with video. I just didn't want to make a super long video at first. I kind of want to grab some attention from some people and then do some more in-depth ones. I am going to begin painting this today. 2 to 3 layers of silver and then clear, and then we'll back tape it and paint the purple. So I'll probably paint this and back tape this, and that'll be the part 1 of the video, and the part 2 is going to be final clear coating, wet sanding, polishing, and installing the LEDs. So this will be into 2 parts just so the video is not too crazy long. So but yeah, this thing's getting ready for paint, so I'm going to get a couple coats on here, let it dry for a day, and then back tape it and do the bluish purple for the rest of the mask and have some shots of that.